Welcome to One Chapter, One Thought. I'm Pastor Chris from Lincroft Bible Church in New Jersey, and every weekday I read one chapter of the New Testament and offer one brief devotional thought. Today's reading is from the book of Hebrews, chapter 5. For every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sin. He can deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is beset with weaknesses. Because of this, he is obligated to offer sacrifice for his own sins just as he does for those of the people. And no one takes this honor for himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made high priest, but was appointed by him who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." And he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered us prayers and supplication with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. About this we have much to say, and it is hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food, for everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. One thought. There is continual exhortation in this book for believers to hold fast to Christ. Last chapter, we saw the author assuring his readers that Christ is the great and gracious high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses. But there's also this strand running through this book where he regularly spurs his readers on to grow. One of the ways that we hold fast to our faith is by growing, and the author points out to a specific problem that his audience is having, that they have become dull of hearing. He says, he wants to explain stuff about this guy named Melchizedek, which we'll get into in a couple of chapters, but he says, this is hard to explain because you have become dull of hearing. Earlier in the book, the author said that we needed to pay close attention to the gospel message so we don't drift from it. And now he increases his warning and sees them slipping into an increasingly precarious situation, being dull in hearing. And this doesn't mean, they all wear hearing aids now. He's not talking about the physical organ of your ears, hearing. What he means is really listening to God's message, internalizing it, and acting on it. That's what hearing means in the Bible. And so the audience is not paying attention to the gospel, having it influence their life, and then living it out. And he sets an example here. It says, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. The expectation the author has is that his readers should be listening to the message, and then furthermore, even passing it along. You ought to be teachers. We know that the cliche is true, that you learn best by teaching. And so if we're not teaching the word, if we are not discipling others, we will stay stunted in our faith. It's interesting that the command Jesus gives his church before he ascends back to heaven is to go make disciples. It's not to be disciples. And I think the reason why Jesus phrases it that way is that we are disciples, or we grow in our discipleship as we make disciples. And so being a teacher of the word doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stand on a stage and be a preacher like a pastor is, but it does mean that you need to be passing the word along to others. And that is how we grow in faith. There is an expectation for growth in our faith. And so the author of Hebrews demonstrates that spiritual maturity isn't something we drift into, right? We talk about drift back in chapter 1. It's something we grow into. He calls his readers and us out of spiritual infancy to awaken within us the desire to continue to grow and grow into maturity in Christ.